Right, so we speak to Lulu White, who's the Chief Executive of Elections Management and Consulting Agency of Africa. She joins us to talk about an article she penned recently saying criticism leveled against the IEC hampers how the institution is viewed. She adds that it further leaves it with the rather difficult task of restoring voter confidence and public trust in the midst of the manifestation of corruption in government institutions across the country. Lulu White, a very good evening to you and thank you so much for speaking to us. Let me start with that introduction. What brought you to this train of thought? Is it because of recent events and the accusations leveled against the IEC, how it's been accused of colluding with the governing party to give it an edge?
Good evening, Tapiso. Thank you very much for the opportunity. The thoughts around the article were precisely around the fact that when the IEC initially announced that they were going to be amending the election timetable to allow for a period of candidate nomination to be open for all political parties, the biggest criticism that came from opposition political parties, specifically the DA and other minority parties, was that the IEC was doing so because they were favoring the African National Congress. Now, if you look at the legislation and the decision that the IEC, that led the IEC to the decision that they took, the legislation allows them to be able to do that. The Constitutional Court and its findings also allowed the IEC to be able to make a decision that would amend the electoral or the election timetable. And in amending the election timetable, the candidate nomination process is one of those parameters that they need to make sure that they make a provision for. But because of the lack of public trust in not necessarily only the IEC, but generally in all public institutions, not only was the DA the only political party that raised that issue, there were various other people. If you look at the trend, public opinion in social media, one got the sense that people did not trust that the IEC was doing what it was expected to do. But people felt that this was being done because the IEC was trying to...
Okay, so let me just jump in right there, because you're talking about social media platform, for instance, and if one were to take that as a sample size or a microcosm of South African society in general and sentiment, I'm sure you'd agree with me that it wouldn't be an accurate one. You speak about DA as a political party and some, perhaps maybe in the middle class, the chattering classes. But what about the groundswell? Is there a critical shortage of trust, lack of trust in the IEC and its capability to do its work?
Yes, the challenge with the groundswell is that there's no way that you can measure what people feel on the ground. So social media, even though it's not a true reflection of what South African society thinks, sort of becomes like a baseline. And also, I think we need to also take into account and have an appreciation of the fact that local government elections is not one of those elections that is generally attended or generally participated in. Most people, I mean, in every history of local government elections, you'll find that the voter turnout there has been always low. So when you look at that and you look at what the opinions of the people are, you can't really gauge. But social media sort of gives you an understanding of what people's thinking is, because, first of all, it's people that are generally active in the democratic processes. And there are people that are very vocal in how they feel about where the country is going. And it's people that are generally quite active and interactive with the institutions and members of society. So in as much as it's not a true reflection of what the country or where the country stands, it gives you a basic gauge, because you can't really get a proper gauge from the ground, as it were, as you would like to be.
It's a litmus test of sorts, yes, but I think you and I would agree that we have a responsibility to educate people, especially about the critical components of what the Electoral Commission of South Africa itself does to ensure that it delivers successful elections, and whether it does have the wherewithal to do so. Talk us through that, please.
All right. So, like I said, the social media is a litmus test, as you've aptly put it. But you also need to remember there was a study by the Afrobarometer. And in as much as the Afrobarometer was basically measuring where public trust is as far as all institutions, public institutions are concerned. And the Electoral Commission of South Africa is actually also a public institution. And whatever lack of trust, public trust that all institutions are facing within the country. So that 69% odd that was recorded as a lack of public trust, it was spread across all. So it's not just now only social media. It was actually also an Afrobarometer
No, I
test.
understand that we are running out of time, and I'd really like us to deal with the issues that you raise, the critical elements that will enable, or that the IEC itself has to, look to deliver a successful election.
All right. So like I said, the Afrobarometer is one of those things that actually give you a sort of like a baseline in terms of where the country is in terms of public trust. But as an as the institution on its own, the Independent Electoral Commission has a history of being effective in the delivery of their mandate. Of course, this year is a telling year because the Electoral Commission has had a lot more challenges than it had ever anticipated, or any other institution for that matter had anticipated. So it is, the article that I wrote is basically against the background that with the challenges that have been facing the country, the IEC also, the challenges that they've had to face with political parties requesting a postponement and them having to turn around and quickly deliver an election. Those are some of the considerations that when the article was written, it was to take into account that these were really live, active challenges that the Electoral Commission had to look to. But despite of all of these challenges, the IEC seems to have done well. If you look at the candidate nomination process that was finalized last week on the Tuesday, the reports, even though they're not yet finalized, from just looking at the point of view, from 78,000 candidates that were previously captured, I think they're close to about 100,000 now. You've got plus minus 1,500 independent candidates that have been captured. Yes, voter registration had its own glitches, but the IEC seems to have gotten past that. So except for public opinion and except for the issues around printing, it does seem as though the IEC is actually ready to actually conduct this election on the date that it was scheduled.
So you say it's less than 40 days and there are, 23 million registered voters. What could possibly go wrong, and how much of that is reliant on the IEC to be able to foresee that and actually, stay some of those challenges?
Look, there's 23,000 odd voting stations, and there's the printing of the voters' roll that needs to take place. The biggest issue around that would be obviously around the printing of the candidate of the ballot papers, because once the candidate nomination process closes, the IEC then needs to go into a process of printing of the ballot. My view is that the printing of the ballot and the printing of the voters' roll is the biggest challenge that the IEC has to face yet. As they prepare for these particular elections. But as I've also stated in the article, I have complete faith that the service providers that the IEC has engaged in this type for this type of work are service providers that they've probably worked with for a number of years. And I'm confident that, they will rise above this particular situation.
And just any final word that we as a general public can do to help the IEC to deliver its mandate and for us to ensure free and fair elections?
Look, the IEC, just as a parting shot, the IEC is ahead of its time within the continent. The IEC has been used as the epitome of credible, free and fair elections on the continent. That is a reputation that does not come easy, particularly with African elections. The IEC's processes as far as engaging the party liaison committees and keeping the public informed with everything that they do is also some of those things that actually sets them apart. There's no process within the IEC that has lacked any transparency to date. And I think, it's a professional opinion that the people of South Africa need to have faith in the fact that as an institution, they are an institution that has upheld the principles of democracy to the T. And the fact that they are looked upon by the whole continent to be able to do that is something that we as South Africans can be proud of. And as a result, I believe that the IEC will be able to get through this particular situation.
Thank you so much for your time and your insights, Lulu White, Chief Executive of Elections Management and Consulting Agency of Africa. Hopefully during the elections we'll have more conversations that will help you understand some of the strictures of the processes that the IEC has to undergo and demands it must meet.